Good morning. Gonna get my coffee here as we get started this morning. Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Stacy, and we are loving my veteran. And this is walking in my shoes this morning. Today's topic is going to be a little tough, open, honest. You're probably going to see I'm going to share information I don't normally share, but it's on our rights, and it's on our rights. Good morning, Sunny. Not to be in an abusive environment. It's a hard topic for me to discuss personally, so I just think it is very important that we bring this to light as far as our rights not to be in that environment. There's a couple of things in the private group. There's a chat room, which I finally learned how that works. So my chat room is there, and as long as it shows an active chat room, you can pop in anytime. Well, I'm not always on there anytime, so the chat room will be open from the end of this video for about an hour if you need to join into the chat room. So when we're talking about rights, morning, Roxy, we see a lot, or we hear a lot about the emotional abuse, the physical abuse, the stuff that goes on. The meeting was amazing, and I'll fill everybody in a little bit that I had yesterday. But we talk about abuse and the mental abuse, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse that goes on. Everyone has a right not to live in that environment. Everyone has a right not to live in that environment. Let me give you my history, and when I say that I can talk about this with some complete honesty, I'm gonna give you the honest, hard facts. My first marriage was so abusive that at one point he held a knife to my throat so I wouldn't go somewhere. There were drugs involved. There were a lot of hateful words involved. There were times I got black eyes and wouldn't go see my family who lived in the same town with me, and I had 2 little kids. By the grace of God, he never abused them. And I allowed myself to live in that physically abusive environment for so long because I was like, oh, you're not allowed to get a divorce. You're the failure. And after the abuse, it was, I love you so much, I'm sorry. And that I love you so much, I'm sorry. And you kind of suck it up, and you feel like you're the defective one sometimes, and you're the one who's causing this sometimes. And that level of physical abuse, no one should ever have to live in. And when you get to the point that, just like Roxy said, it's empowering to finally leave that, when you get to that point that you can leave that, it is tough, it is hard. There's so much control in that relationship that you have no idea what it's like. I wasn't allowed to wear certain things. I wasn't allowed to watch certain TV shows. I wasn't allowed to talk to my family at certain times. That was all his demands. And you don't live in that environment. You don't live, and you're not productive in that environment. But on the flip side of that, and let me tell you this, on the flip side of that, I was very belittled. I didn't have a backbone. I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't believe that I was worth anything. And that tearing down of you is just, it's so tough. And it is very hard to live with. I dealt with sexual abuse in my childhood. I'm not divulging that information here or anywhere publicly. I might in the private chat with us, because it affects people who are still alive today. Then I'm not willing to bring that out. But I had that. And then after the abusive relationship, um, the horribly abusive relationship that I went through, I married Woody. We were married 28 years, and I didn't realize that I had moved from one abusive relationship to another. He was very narcissistic. And why the physical didn't go on, it was all about him and all about him and all about him. And I found myself apologizing for everything that went on. So living that life, I didn't have the right to live that life either. Okay, I didn't have the right. I didn't have to live that life either. And after 28 years, I decided I wasn't going to. Then I end up in a relationship with Carl, who y'all know I adore and love more than anything, and PTSD comes in. And when he was not in a moment, when he was not in his PTSD moment, things were great. I'm his princess, and y'all see him walk back and forth behind me, patting my little head like but he does that. I mean, he loves me like that. And so it is very hard to differentiate what is abuse. Yeah, God love Carl. What is abuse and what is their PTSD symptoms, and how much we can be abusive back. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow when I started going to therapy. How abusive are we back? Physical abuse is tough, okay? Living in fear is tough. But mental abuse is very hard. And I found that why I couldn't just pick up my fist and hit the first one back. Right? I learned that my coping mechanism was verbal abuse. Okay? My coping mechanism became verbal abuse. I know I said the other day that I have like Carl's button on freaking speed dial, right? And I can just hit that button. That is very much abusive. And I'm probably really going to say things here that may piss some people off, but these are my views. And again, I'm not a counselor. So I want to go to one other issue before we really get into abuse and how we have to, how you live and how you have the right not to live in an abusive environment. I had a boss that had Tourette's, okay, and we worked for the shipyard, and we had all these Navy officials in and out, and he had Tourette's, and so as his Tourette's would go, he would rub his hands a certain way, and then he'd balk like a chicken. It was just part of the Tourette's, and he'd just look at people and he'd go, "Fuck you, fuck you, son of a bitch, fuck you, you suck." I mean, so that just came out. Well, we never took it personally because we knew it was Tourette's, right? I mean, when you're in that Tourette's thing, you don't control that. It just spits out. And it was something that early on I realized that some people just do that. And so as I started to navigate through the PTSD side, as I started to understand both sides of the coin here, and I knew there were certain things I was not going to live with ever. you have to understand how the PTSD brain works. You have to understand that they push buttons, we push buttons, and you have to understand. I'm not making an excuse for them, and I posted in the description to this the number to the National Abuse Hotline, because nobody deserves to live in an abusive relationship, and they will find you a place and get you out safely. So if you are being physically harmed, or your children, or mentally to a point, you need to reach out. So I'm putting that out there, because nobody deserves to live in that kind of a relationship or a home life, an environment. I'm not talking about there's an environment that we understand. So let's get to the veteran mind and their delivery and how we react and the rights that we have. I know I said early on, and I've said this 100 times to y'all, I made lists, what I would and would not deal with. I had a hard, fast list. You absolutely, my hard, fast limit was, you will never lay your hands on me in anger. You will never lay your hands on me in anger. Okay? You're not going to be in your rage. I don't care if you're in your rage. You are not going to lay your hands on me. That was a hard, fast limit for me. Okay? Now, let's talk about the PTSD side. First of all, these are all combat veterans. They have no empathy, so when they deliver some of the things they're saying, it comes across brash and hard. Okay, that is a delivery thing with them. It is no different than my boss who had Tourette's. That's the way they function. PTSD causes anger and rage. I have it. I have PTSD. I go through moments of anger and rage. I have picked up a dozen eggs and slung them across the freaking house. They don't clean up well. Okay? They don't clean up well. So you have to understand that when that moment of anger and rage and frustration comes, it's all bottled up inside, and it has to go somewhere. So is the somewhere better? And this is early on as you're starting to navigate through this. Is the somewhere better to hit a wall? Is the somewhere better to throw something, as long as it's not at you? Is the better that until everybody learns how to get it out? And I'm not saying that is better. Those are questions you have to ask yourself. Is it better that it go there? Okay, so understand that is part of the PTSD issues. My ex-husband's grandmother, sweetest, most Christian woman I knew. She was in her 80s. She dressed to the nines every day. She was amazing and super sweet. And my ex-husband's mom brought her to the house one day, and she said, "Something's wrong with Grandma. I want you to kind of check this out." And she lived 4 hours away, and so Elaine went and got her and brought her to the house. Look, and Grandma would be sitting there. Her clothes be all weird. And she would look at people and she would be like, totally off the wall. Like if Elaine would say something out of line, right? If Elaine would say something out of line, Grandma would be like, "You're a dumbass." Sorry. "You're a dumbass. You're stupid." And all this started coming out of Grandma's mouth. I'm like, this is not Grandma. What the heck? well, I mean, this is not even her. Well, this went on for, they took her home, and this kind of stuff went on for about 2 weeks. Long story short, I got her back to where I lived, where I knew the doctors and the family and all the important stuff. And we realized at that point that what was going on was she had a brain tumor. Okay, so she couldn't control what went out. And so you have to kind of remember how all the pieces play. And when you are have been in an abusive relationship for so long, or even when you go, which I thought was interesting looking back, I went from a very, I was abused as a child, not by my parents, okay? I had an abusive issue when I was a child. So my first marriage was to an abuser. My second marriage was to an abuser. So sometimes our brain thinks that that's all we're worthy of. So that's another point that you really have to think about, because it becomes a cycle. And when I made that decision that I wasn't doing this anymore, and then I end up with Carl, who is not abusive, but his PTSD issues at that moment of the rage and the anger, they are explosive, but he has learned it's better to hit the wall, which, by the way, now that we live in a concrete bunker, okay, now that it's not as pleasant to hit the wall because it's cinder block. But he's learned to, if that's how he has to let it out, that's what he does. And so that kind of, but he never hurts me. He never lays his hands on me. So that was just kind of the things that you have to think about as you go through, is it the disease? But on the flip side, when we, as our defense mechanism, or when people hurt, okay, when you hurt, you have a tendency to want other people to hurt. When you are in a negative mood, it draws negativity, and this is not abusive, just draws negativity in. You do what you're in. So if he is in a rage and we're not getting, and we're having a discussion, and it doesn't necessarily go the way I want it to go, or he says something like, and he's really good at saying this, and it took me a long time to realize it wasn't personal. He's like, so something, I'll give you the example. We brought my son's dog here, okay, because he had some skin issues, and my son worked a lot, and I was like, we'll bring the dog. And Carl and my mom were like, I don't think that's a good idea. Okay, I don't think that's a good idea, but it's your son. If you want to do it, bring him here. It was not a good idea. It created all kinds of issues for us, right? It created all kinds of issues for us. So instead of him, when the dog was here, saying, look, Stacey, this is just not working out, the dog's got to go, he would look at me and say, I told you not to do that. So I got defensive, because I'm like, oh, now he's attacking me. I'm stupid. Okay? I let you make your own mind up, and I said whatever, but I told you it wasn't what I really thought was good, and I told you. And so I felt like he was attacking me, or you should. And so I felt like he was attacking me. So about that time, Stacey gets out her phone of buttons that you can push, and I'm like, and the hateful things just come out of my mouth to him. And one day when we got to a point where we could calm down and have a real conversation, he said, the hurtful, angry, hateful things you say to me cut me, and they are incredibly abusive. They hurt. And I'm like, oh my God, I've been doing it back. And that was a hard pill to swallow. You know, I had made up my mind I wasn't going to live in an abusive anything. And I'm spewing out this stuff. Okay? And you're right, Stephanie, I'm learning to change that too. But when you start to spew out this stuff, it is emotionally abusive. And so, at that point, I called my friend who is a social worker, and I said, look, what am I doing? And she said, let me just bring you up to speed on a few things. And I said, okay. And she said, I never, ever, ever condone physical or horrific emotional abuse. And I'm like, yeah, me either. Been there, done that. Got the divorces to prove it. Got it. Carried the baggage for a long time. Got it. And she said, but when you spew out those things, aren't you being abusive too? Shit. I never thought of myself as an abuser. You know, I was the abusee. I was the meat-mouthed abusee person. Yeah. But when I started spewing out that vomit, it was just like it. And then I started to do things like he wouldn't do something when I wanted it done, right? Control. You know, there's one thing if it's like an emergency and we have to do something at this time, you know, things have to be done. But if I'm like, hey, can you get to this? This needs to get done eventually. And he chooses not to get up off the couch or stop whatever he's doing to do it, I kind of just like blew up and stormed off and did it myself. And it became very demasculating, right? So what happened at that point? I took away the manhood, which is another form of abuse. So for me to be able to sit here and say that I can be abusive too, that I can be abusive too, was hard. So it does make you feel horrible, and it does make you feel guilty. And the reality is that we have to stop the cycle. The reality is that everybody has to grow. The reality is that with a lot of open, honest conversations, you don't have to jump when he asks you to. So, you don't. He'll learn that. He'll learn that. It's a growth process. It's a growth process. And I'm telling you, me getting to this realization didn't happen overnight. Me getting to this realization that I was doing, spitting out stuff that was horrible. It took me a long time to get to this. Look, I lived in one for 4 years, was married to one for 4 years, was married to one for 28 years, and I've been with Carl, and now I'm just getting it. You know, after 30 some years, you'd think I would have figured this out. But I didn't. Till now. Till I started to learn about my own personal growth. And I started to learn that the rights that I have are the same rights that they have. The rights that I have are the same rights that Stephanie has, or Roxy has, or you have, Sarah. We all are entitled to these rights. So if we are entitled to these rights, everybody is. And it goes to the do unto others thing. Now, I am not saying, again, I've been there. I've had the black eyes. I've had the knife. I've had all those things. I tried to leave with my 2 small children in the middle of the night because he worked night shift. I tried to leave in the middle of the night, climbing out a window. And he must have known I was going to do it because he didn't go to work that day and he caught me in the bushes and it was ugly. It was ugly. So I've been that road. I understand that road. I've done that. We've been that road. And unfortunately, that's what happens. Nobody lives in that. Nobody should live in that. But as far as the verbal saying hurtful things, he's right. Rome wasn't built in a day. But once all the materials and knowledge is there, the building can begin. You got to start with the plan. You got to acknowledge, first you got to acknowledge something has to be done. That's the first part. You have to acknowledge that something has to be done and that you deserve better. That's the first part. And not only do you deserve better, because let me tell you, let me just be honest, and I'm sure there are people who are not going to agree with what I have to say. Good morning, Leah. There are people who are not going to agree with what I have to say on this topic. We have to understand, first and foremost, that nobody has the right to live or be in an abusive environment. That means both. We have to understand that when one person changes and your mindset changes, you can directly affect the mindsets of others. So when you make this decision and you have this plan and you start building it one thing at a time, let me tell you, I owned a construction company, and I'm going to go back to Nakia's thing. I owned a construction company. After we got the plans and the blueprints and all the stuff kind of laid out there where we wanted it to be, right? And they came in and they cleared the stuff, you had to dig the footings, okay? That like took forever. Digging the footings and making sure everything was level and square and done and that you had all of the piping in and the conduit for the electrical and all that stuff in. That took forever. Forever. To get that done. And get it level and get the foundations right. It took forever to get the foundation right. And that's what we have to do going forward as far as learning to communicate and learning to change the environment we live in. You have to get the foundation right. The plan, the foundation, it takes the grunt work. It takes going home dirty. It takes all that. You got to dig trenches for the flipping. You got to dig trenches, y'all, for the sewer line. You got to dig trenches for the water line. You got to dig trenches for the electrical to come out. Then you get the blocks in. And that takes a while because, y'all, I mean, it just doesn't go up over time, okay? It doesn't go in overnight. It just doesn't happen. You got to put those little blocks in, and the rebar's got to go down in the little blocks. And then they got to set and they got to dry. And you're like, okay, look, I've done the grunt work. I got the blocks. Can we get the flooring on? Because once the flooring goes on, then we can get the walls up, right? And so you're going through this scenario, right? And they have to dry. And it's just like your relationship. You got to do the grunt work, and you have to make the plan first, and then you got to do the grunt work, and then you got to let it rest for a little bit. You got to let it rest for a little bit. You got to make sure that our footings are set. You got to make sure that our footings are dry. You got to make sure that we learn to communicate. You got to make sure that we have the right mindset. We have the right mindset, because you can't change their mind. That's on them. And I don't care who you're with, whether you're talking about an abusive relationship at work. I don't care if it is whatever, right? What you got to let it set, and it's got to sit there for a little bit to let that go away. All right, you got to let it set there. Then once it's set there, you get to lay the little floor joists out and the subflooring and all that stuff. All right, well that gets there, and you got to lay all the dumb little things, and then you got to start building the walls, and then the walls get built, and then eventually you get the rafters on, and then you get the thing on, and it didn't get dried in for a long time. It didn't even start to look like a house for a long time. Then once that's done, so you got to go through these steps, and you got to go through them all to get to where you need to be. Once the walls are in and you start to put up the outside weird dry stuff, to wrap the house, then you still don't have a house. You got to plumb the electrical and the plumbing and pull all the wires. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. It is a process. But every day I walked into a house to go on a job site, and you walked into a house every day or every couple of days, you could see the progress. It was slow, but you could see the progress. And that's what happens with us. We're gonna see the progress. So the fact we don't have a right to live in a truly abusive environment, they don't either. And how does it stop? If it is physically, painfully, you're in danger abusive, you get out and you call that number. Right? You get out and you call that number. That's what you do. If you are in a physical danger, and here's the thing, you don't have to call it while it's going on. So let's say that you were in this environment and it was very ugly and very explosive and you were afraid. You don't have to be like running around in your car. You can call that number, all right? And they will help you. And a lot of people stay because of finances. Well, how am I going to live? Girl, I'm telling you right now, I'm telling everybody right now, if you call that number and they get you placed somewhere, they will help you with money and get you navigated through the system, and they will help you with lawyers, and they will help you do all of that stuff. And if you go to a shelter, that's why most people, you can't get an address for that shelter, because if you go to a shelter, it is completely anonymous. They have security there. They will not get in to hurt you there. So it is very important. So I need you to understand, if you're in that, you can call days or even weeks later and say, I'm ready to get out, and they will help you. But as far as the rest of this stuff goes through, as far as the rest of this in our environment, take the steps, take the time, learn to live it, learn not to be abusive back with our own horrible words. We can't expect not to be emotionally abused or to deal with the emotional pain, because I don't want to call it abuse. Carl doesn't abuse me. He spits out some hateful things sometimes that I say some hateful things back. Or I say hateful things and then he says hateful things to me. But if one of you stops saying the hateful things, okay? If that's what happens, that's how you go forward. And that's how you break the cycle. See, I'm with you. I left with nothing. I left both marriages with nothing. Both with nothing. Both with nothing. When I left this last time, then I left Woody, I left him everything. The furniture, the house, the land, everything. I wanted out. I was done. And you can rebuild your life. Because your life and your sanity is not measured. Your life and your sanity, let me put this out here very clearly, your life and your sanity is not measured by the the material, the materialistic things in your life. That's not your success. Right? So you don't have to have the $300,000 house because your friends and your family have it. I'm gonna tell you, I would have lived in a tent if I could have, when I protected my children. Right? Yeah, the key is great. In order for a forest fire to continue, it takes fuel. And the hardest thing she had to learn was not to fuel it. And that is so important. So I wanted to share this topic today. I know this is not the easiest topic to talk about. And I know there are a lot of people who are going to say, well, I don't deserve his words ever. No, nobody does. But he doesn't deserve mine either. It's a two-way street. What was the old saying? Don't throw stones if you live in a glass house. And there's a big difference in the verbal hate we spew out versus verbal abuse. There's a big difference between the verbal stuff that we spew out and physical abuse. So I just want y'all to know that. All right, now that I'm kind of wrapped that up, we will go to the chat room if anybody wants to continue this in the chat room, because now that I know how to do it, I'm so excited. We can go to the chat room if somebody wants to continue this conversation. Tomorrow, the topic is, we have the right to expect honesty from others. That's interesting. Basically, don't tell people what you want them to hear, tell them the truth. That's what we need. So it is very important that we learn to go through these self-awarenesses. I will be working this weekend on what we're going to go forward into February, on personal growth and how we're going to continue that, and maybe on the month of February will be, because it's Valentine's Day, I want to know what love is, because I think that we define love like Cinderella. Just don't forget that her slipper broke and she had to have stitches because she cut her artery. But I think we need to talk about love and how we can show it, and how without empathy, because we know that veterans don't have empathy, and how without empathy they also show love. So I just want to put that out there. Don't forget, tonight is Let's Talk. If y'all give me 2 minutes, I will, before I get into the chat room, I will post that Let's Talk again. It is 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We talk forever. Spouses, veterans, we take them all. We have an incredibly good time. But we talk about some real open and honest things. All I can say is, without being on this, is please pray for our country, the leadership that we have, and that we find peace and healing here, because that's what we do. We're Americans and we're resilient. I think that's all I have for today. Y'all have a blessed day. I'm Stacy. This has been Walking in My Shoes, and we are loving my veteran. Bye, y'all.